They say dragons only bow to fire, and fire bows to no one. But that night, the fire didn't bow. It took her. So let's go back. Not to when the dragons were flying or the wars were raging. No, this starts in that quiet, dangerous moment. When the last embers of Khal Drogo's funeral pyre were catching wind and the night smelled like smoke and old magic. Daenerys Targaryen stood tall, proud, maybe a little mad already. Her silver hair shone under the moon, and her eyes were locked on the flames. Jorah stood nearby, confused but loyal. Her followers, the ones who still stuck around after Drogo fell silent, they watched like something holy was about to happen. She stepped forward, holding those dragon eggs tight to her chest. Everyone held their breath. She walked into the fire. Now, in the world we knew, she came out alive, untouched, reborn with dragons clinging to her like children to a mother. But that ain't how this one goes. She walked in. The heat wrapped around her, slow at first, like it was testing her. Her skin began to glisten with sweat. But then, the fire took hold. Jorah shouted her name, tried to run in after her, but the Dothraki held him back. She screamed. Not a scream of power, not some magical chant, no, a scream like any person makes when their skin starts to burn off their bones. The fire didn't recognize her blood. The old magic didn't rise to save her. The eggs didn't crack. They didn't twitch. They just sat there, silent and cold, roasting in the same heat that swallowed her whole. Jorah was still screaming, fighting them off, but they wouldn't let him through. Not even those who called her Khaleesi dared the fire. They didn't know what was happening. It was too fast, too loud. When the fire finally died down by morning, there wasn't a miracle to be seen. No dragons, no rebirth, no silver-haired queen standing in the ashes. There was a body, charred, twisted. The only thing left that told you it had once been her was a strand of melted silver hair stuck to blackened skull. Jorah fell to his knees. He didn't cry right then. His face just broke, like something deep in him shattered and wouldn't fix again. The Dothraki. Some of them turned and walked away, just left. No words. Others muttered about cursed blood, about the gods being angry. A few stayed behind, looking at Jorah like they might kill him next, blame him for this madness. The eggs, well, they cracked later, but not in the way stories like to tell. The fire had done too much damage. Two of them split open like overcooked meat, dripping something foul and unnatural. The third one, it stayed solid, black and smooth, like it was waiting for something, or someone else. That was the end of Daenerys Stormborn. No mother of dragons, no breaker of chains. Just a Targaryen girl with dreams of fire, who found out too late that fire doesn't dream back. Jorah buried her with his own hands, dug into the dirt, placed what he could find inside a mound of stones. No songs, no speeches, just silence, the kind that lingers too long. He took the unbroken egg with him, maybe out of hope, maybe out of madness. It didn't matter. He carried it like a curse tied to his soul. Now back in Westeros, nobody knew. Not for a long while. Viserys had already died, crown of gold on his head, and no one expected much from the last of the dragon blood. So when word got back, if it even did, it didn't shake kingdoms. It didn't move armies. It was just a tale, a whisper among traders and travelers. The silver-haired girl burned like dry grass. The dragons never came, and the world kept turning. But there was something different in Essos after that. The Dothraki grew restless. The magic in the air thinned like something powerful had been lost forever. And across the narrow sea, in the dark corners of old castles, the red priests and priestesses felt the shift. Some said it was a sign, a mistake, a loss of balance. Others, they said it wasn't over. But for Jorah Mormont, it was. He wondered. The free cities with that last egg, broken inside and out. He told no one, didn't speak her name. Didn't speak much at all. People thought he'd gone mad, a sellsword with sad eyes and a dark thing hidden in his pack. He'd take the egg out sometimes, just to look at it, feel it. He'd whisper to it, sometimes like he was trying to wake it, other times like he was apologizing, and maybe the egg listened, maybe not. But the fire that didn't save Daenerys still had something left to say. It was in Volantis where the dream started. Jorah hadn't meant to stay there long, just a bed, some food, and a place where no one looked at him like a fallen knight. But the city had a way of keeping broken men in its shadow. The flames of the Red Temple burned bright every night, and the priests walked the streets with fire in their eyes, talking about the Lord of Light and chosen ones. He hated it, hated their talk of flames and destiny, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when the dreams had begun. It was always the same. Daenerys, standing in the fire, not screaming this time, just looking at him. Her skin wasn't burned, but her eyes were hollow, like she knew, like she remembered what he hadn't been able to stop, and the egg, in every dream, that black egg, was right there beside her, pulsing, glowing with something just beneath the surface. He'd wake up, drenched, in sweat, hand gripping the egg so hard he swore he felt it twitch. Just once, just a little. He didn't tell anyone, not about the dreams, not about the egg. But Volantis noticed him anyway. It wasn't long before one of the Red Priestesses came to him. She found him in a market, quiet and tired, holding a piece. Her fruit like it might vanish. Her robes were deep crimson and her eyes didn't blink when she looked at him. "You've seen her," she said. "In flame." He didn't answer, just turned to leave, but her voice followed him. She wasn't the one. But something clings to you. Something old. Jorah didn't sleep that night. He took the egg out again, watched it under the lantern light. No cracks, no signs. Just the same smooth black surface, cold, heavy. He left Volantis the next day, headed east, into places even the maps didn't bother to name. He followed the dream. Or maybe he was running from it. Hard to say, somewhere near the Shadowlands. Where the mountains bled smoke and the water tasted like iron, he found an old woman, blind in both eyes, skin like crumpled parchment. She didn't speak when he approached, just held out her hand, and he, like a man with no better plan, gave her the egg. She touched it for a long time, then said, "It was never meant for her. That's why the fire took her." Jorah clenched his fists. She believed. That should have been enough, the woman chuckled, dry and bitter. "Belief doesn't make you chosen, fire decides." He took the egg back and walked away. Her laughter followed him into the hills. Weeks passed, maybe months. He lost track. The egg stayed the same. Heavy, silent, except not quite. One night, deep in the woods near Korth, he felt warmth. Not the sun, not a campfire. From the egg. It pulsed in his hands, like a heartbeat. Slow, steady. He didn't sleep, just sat there staring at it. It didn't move again, but something had changed. He knew it. And then came the caravan. Merchants, slavers, cutthroats. A mix of all things vile and necessary. He travelled with them, quiet, always holding the egg close. One man tried to steal it. Jorah killed him with a dagger to the throat before the others even woke up. After that, no one touched it again. In Korth, the House of the Undying took interest. Creepy folk, always whispering about magic and prophecy. They offered him gold, secrets, power. He said no, but they watched him. Always. He started hearing Daenerys's name again. Not from them, from travellers, traders, drunk men in taverns. They spoke about her like she was still alive. Some swore she'd been seen riding a dragon. Others claimed she ruled a kingdom far east. All lies. Jorah knew better. She was gone, burned, lost. But the world didn't seem to care. It kept building stories around her ghost. He hated it, hated them for speaking her name, hated himself more, for not saving her. Still, he stayed, hoping the egg would do something. Anything. And then one night, it did. He was asleep when it cracked, a sharp noise like stone breaking under weight. He woke with a start, hand grabbing for it in the dark. Surface had split just a little, a single line thin and jagged. No creature came out, no dragon, just steam and a low hum like a breath from another world. He stared at it, heart pounding. The crack was warm to the touch, but the rest of the egg remained cold. He didn't know what it meant. He just knew this wasn't over. Daenerys was gone, but something else had started. Jorah didn't leave Korth for a long while after that crack appeared. He kept the egg close, wrapped in thick cloth, hidden beneath his cloak, even during the burning heat of the day. He barely spoke, just watched, waited. Every night, he'd unwrap it like a father checking on a fevered child, hoping for more, a second crack, a twitch, anything. But nothing came. Days passed, weeks maybe. The line across the shell stayed, sharp and quiet like a scar that refused to heal. People in Korth started whispering again, not just about him this time, about strange things, lights in the sky, fires in the desert that didn't burn out, a sickness spreading in the poorer quarters. No one had answers, everyone had theories. Jorah ignored it all. He'd seen stranger things, but one night something different happened. He was sitting by a well in the shadow of a broken tower when a boy came up to him. Skinny thing, couldn't have been more than 10. Dusty face, eyes too big for his skull, didn't speak, just pointed at the egg. Jorah stiffened. "You shouldn't be here, boy." The kid didn't move, still pointing. Then, real slow, he opened his mouth. But what came out wasn't a child's voice. "She's not dead," it said. Jorah froze. The egg in his lap pulsed, just once, like a jolt under his hands. He grabbed the boy by the collar. "What did you say?" The kid blinked, looked confused. "Mister, let go! I didn't say nothing!" Jorah let him go. The boy bolted into the dark. He looked down at the egg, still, silent. But that warmth was back, not just from the crack now. The whole thing felt like it had a slow fire burning beneath the shell. He didn't sleep that night. Next morning he packed up and left Korth. No destination, just away. Somewhere quiet, somewhere the whispers. Couldn't find him. He ended up at an old stone ruin in the Red Waste. No one lived there, not even the wind stayed long. But Jorah did. He built a small fire, set the egg near it, sat across from it like it might speak, and he waited. One night, during a sandstorm that felt like the sky itself was being shredded, it happened. The egg cracked again, this time louder. The noise echoed through the stones. He jumped up, blade in hand, not knowing what he was expecting. A dragon, a monster, maybe even Daenerys herself, but it wasn't any of that. The egg split wide open, and nothing came out. Just smoke, thick and dark, curling like it had a mind of its own. It slithered through the air, wrapped around him, and then it spoke, not with words, not with sound, but he heard it all the same. "You brought her here. You gave her to the fire, and now you carry the curse." Jorah dropped the egg, or what was left of it. It crumbled into dust before it hit the ground. He staggered back, looked at his hands. They were covered in soot and blood, his blood. Thin cuts had opened across his palms, like the shell had bitten him, and then, standing in the smoke, he saw her, Daenerys. Not flesh and bone, not ghost or dream. Something in between. Her face was half burned, hair singed to the scalp, but her eyes, those violet eyes, stared straight through him. He didn't speak. Couldn't. She did. "You let me die." He shook his head. "I tried." "You watched." She stepped closer. The smoke clung to her like a shroud. "You believed in me, but not enough." He fell to his knees. She touched his face. Cold fingers, colder than the grave. "You still carry me," she said, "so you will carry them too." And just like that, she was gone. The smoke vanished. The fire was out. The egg was dust, and Jorah was alone again. Except now, he wasn't. Something had settled inside him, something dark, heavy, alive. That night he felt it move under his skin. Not pain. Something else, a presence, and far away, in the distant cities of Essos, children started to dream of dragons again. Word travels strange in Essos. One moment you're a broken man hiding in ruins, the next your name's being whispered in back alleys and temples like you're something more than flesh. That's what happened to Jorah. They started calling him the Burnt Bear, not because he'd been touched by fire, but because something about him looked scorched. Not outside, inside. Like his soul had been toasted black and never cooled down. He didn't ask for it, didn't want it, but he noticed things. Dogs stopped barking when he passed. Flames bent toward him like they knew him. Children stared too long. And every night, no matter where he laid his head, the smoke returned, curling at the edges of his vision, bringing her voice with it. "You carry me now," Daenerys whispered, again and again. He started seeing her face in other people. At a market, he looked up and saw a merchant woman smiling, only for her face to flicker, just for a breath, into Dany's ruined, burning stare. At night, campfires hissed her name in the wind, and it wasn't just visions. There were things following him, birds with black eyes that didn't blink, a fox with 3 tails. Once, he found a trail of ash that led from his tent to a nearby stream, and nothing had been burning that night. People noticed. One evening in Lazar, a healer approached him with shaking hands and said, "You walk with death on your back." Jorah didn't deny it. He kept moving east. The further from Westeros, the better, but the further he walked, the stranger things became. He passed a village with no voices, everyone mute, their tongues blackened. By some unknown curse, they just pointed at the egg dust he still carried in a small pouch, whispered prayers with their eyes. In another town, a boy lit himself on fire, chanting, "She returns." When they pulled his body from the flames, he was smiling. Jorah didn't stop anymore. Didn't speak much either, but one day in a shadowed mountain pass he found someone waiting for him. A red priest, young, face pale as bone, robes glowing in the setting sun. He stood beside a pyre, fresh built and unlit. "I've been waiting," the priest said, "for the one who carries her fire." Jorah didn't answer. The priest smiled like he knew silence well. "She speaks through you. Not many survive that kind of bond. But you did. You were her knight. Now you're her vessel." "I'm no vessel," Jorah growled. "Oh, but you." The fire didn't take her. It took root. Then the priest knelt and offered him a torch. "Light it." Jorah didn't move. "Light it," the man whispered again, "and see what still breathes inside the flame." So Jorah took the torch, lit the pyre. The wood caught like it had been soaked in oil. It roared to life, and the priest stepped back with tears in his eyes. "Watch." The fire rose high, choking the stars, and in it shadows moved, not tricks of light, not smoke. Real forms, wings, claws. A woman walking barefoot through fire like it didn't matter this time. Jorah stepped forward, but the fire didn't welcome him. It snapped, cracked, hissed, and the priest fell backward, screaming. The flames reached for Jorah's chest, not to burn him, but to open him. He felt something inside him twist, and then, for the first time since that pyre back with Drogo, he screamed. When he woke, the fire was gone. The pyre was dust. The priest, nothing left but ash, not a bone in sight, and Jorah's chest. It bore a new mark, right over his heart, a sigil. The shape of a dragon, coiled and broken, mouth open like it was screaming too. He didn't know what it meant. But far away, in Valyria, something stirred. The sky cracked with lightning that touched no ground. And 3 new eggs, darker than night, colder than death, formed beneath the ruins, humming with a song only one man could hear. Jorah. Mormont the burnt bear, the one who'd carried Daenerys' fire past death. Valyria was the kind of place that didn't forgive visitors. Smoke never stopped pouring from the cracks in the ground. The air tasted like rust and rot. Even the stones felt angry. Broken, jagged, sharp, just to be sharp. Sailors called it cursed. Sorcerers called it sacred. Jorah didn't care what it was. He went anyway, not because he was brave. Not because he had answers, but because the dreams wouldn't let him go anywhere else. Every night Daenerys came to him again. Only now she wasn't whispering anymore. She was calling, pulling. Her burned hand outstretched, her voice echoing. Like thunder underwater, bring them home. He didn't ask who they were. He knew. The dragons. Or whatever these new things were trying to be. He found them in a hole near the shattered towers. Deep, black, like the earth had caved in just to hide them. 3 eggs, but not like the ones she had. These were twisted. One looked like it was made from obsidian, sharp-edged and smoking. Another had veins running across it like frozen blood. The last one, it pulsed, with breath, like something inside already knew it was alive. He didn't touch them at first, just stared, and they stared back, not with eyes. Not yet, but he felt them watching. She's waiting, a voice said. He turned fast, hand on his blade. No one there. Bring them to her, the voice hissed again. From behind, from above, from inside him maybe. He grabbed the eggs, one by one. Each burned hotter than the last, but he didn't let go. His palms blistered, skin peeled. He didn't care. He strapped them to his pack, walked back through that cursed valley without flinching. The smoke parted around him like it recognized its kin, and then the sky began to follow him. Clouds gathered wherever he went. Storms rolled in out of nowhere. Crows followed in dozens, landing on dead trees just to watch him pass. In Meereen, a plague broke out the same night he slept outside its walls. In Astapor, fires erupted from the ground the second his boots touched their streets. He wasn't Jorah Mormont anymore. People whispered new names. Dragonshade, the Firebearer, Ash Knight. But none of that mattered. All he wanted was to reach the place where it began, Drogo's pyre. He crossed half of Essos to get there. Didn't eat much, barely drank, but he kept walking. Even when his feet bled. Even when the eggs started whispering too. Not with words, but with need. A hunger that grew louder the closer he got, and when he finally arrived, the place was gone. The pyre had been swallowed by sand. Nothing left but scorched rocks and wind-carved hollows. He dropped to his knees, laid the eggs in a circle, sat in the center like some old priest praying for the end of days. And he waited, not for hours, for days, until the night the stars blinked. Out one by one, and she came. Daenerys. Not just smoke now, not just shadow. She had form and fury. Her body flickered like fire held together by memory. Her voice came from every direction. You brought them. He nodded. I am the fire now, not a queen, not a savior, just fire. The eggs cracked, not gently, not like a birthing, like explosions. The obsidian ones split with a roar. Something slithered out, winged, jagged, not quite dragon, not quite alive. The second one melted into the sand, birthing a creature with glass skin and bleeding eyes. The third didn't hatch, it just hummed, louder and louder, until even Daenerys turned to look. You, she said to Jorah, you are the last shell. He looked down, his chest, the mark on it was glowing. You're not a knight anymore. And then the pain came, worse than fire, worse than grief. His body tore itself apart from the inside, bones cracking, skin splitting, blood boiling, but he didn't scream. He became the third thing. When it was done, Jorah was no longer a man. He stood tall, taller than before, scaled, eyes gold and empty, wings made of ash stretched behind him wide enough to blot out the moon. He looked at Daenerys. She smiled, a cruel, broken smile. "You didn't save me," she said, "but now you serve me." And behind them, the other. Two beasts screeched into the night sky, ready to burn the world that forgot her. They didn't fly, not like the dragons of old, smooth and majestic. They tore through the sky, ripped the air apart with every beat of their broken wings. One left a trail of ash, the other left screams that didn't come from any throat, just sound, alive and angry. And behind them the third one walked, not soared, walked Jorah, or what was left of him. Didn't need wings. His steps cracked the ground. His breath shimmered with heat, not fire, but something deeper, ancient, wrong. They weren't heading to Westeros for glory. They were heading for it like executioners walking to a throne. King's Landing was the first to fall. They say the sky turned orange before anyone saw a single wing. The Red Keep melted from the top down. Not in flames, in rot, like time collapsed around it. Statues aged and crumbled in seconds. People inside turned to dust before they even screamed. Cersei was still queen when it happened. She tried to run. The mountain stood by her, sword raised. But it didn't matter. When Daenerys descended in her smoke-wrapped form, she didn't strike. She just watched, and Cersei burned from the inside, skin bubbling, eyes hollow. She clawed at her own throat like she was choking on her own lies. The throne, gone, turned to molten slag. Nobody took it after that. There was nothing left to rule. In the north, Jon Snow felt it before he heard the news. He woke in the middle of the night, gasping for air, hand to his chest, like someone had carved fire into his ribs. Ghost howled outside the walls. The wind didn't move the trees anymore. It avoided them. Then the ravens stopped coming, and then Winterfell went silent. Jon rode hard for Eastwatch, desperate, stubborn, maybe still believing he could fix things. But by the time he reached the sea, all he saw was black, not smoke, not night, just black, stretching over the water like spilled ink, and in the middle of it, a shape, tall, wide, walking on the sea like the water feared to sink him. Jorah, not the man, the monster, the ash-colored dragon beast, fire in his chest, wings tucked behind a broken back, eyes full of sorrow and hate. Jon turned around. He didn't try to fight, he just rode. Back in Essos, the Red Temples fell silent. Their fires all went out in the same breath. The priests stood in their robes, arms open, begging for R'hllor to speak again. But he didn't. He couldn't, because the flame that had once danced in their temples now danced in Daenerys, and she wasn't answering prayers. She was punishing them, all of them. For every betrayal, every doubt, every time someone looked at her and saw just a girl with silver hair instead of a storm come to life. Tyrion died quietly, far away, in a small village near Pentos. He drank until the sky turned red and muttered to the wind, "I warned them." The fire never reached him, not because he was spared, but because by then there was no fire needed. Just the memory of what Daenerys had become, just the ash in every corner of the world. They say the dragons stopped screaming one day. They just vanished into the clouds, not dead, not gone, just waiting. Jorah, the creature he became, was last seen walking into the ruins of Valyria, the same place he found the cursed eggs. No one followed him, not even the wind. And Daenerys, she never faded. She became the fire. The sky would light up red once a year on the night of her death, and people would hear a voice in the flames. "You, watch me burn." The world never built statues, never held ceremonies. They just remembered, because fire doesn't forgive, and neither did she.